Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We're going to talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Mark Ronson titled Uptown Special. So by now, you've all heard Uptown Funk if you live anywhere close to a radio, and for most, I reckon it hasn't quite worn out its welcome just yet. I mean, it's a funk track with a ton of energy from one of the more talented pop performers in the industry right now. It's a lot of fun. What's not to like about the song? Yeah, I've already talked plenty about Uptown Funk on Billboard Breakdown before, but I knew at some point I had to get deeper and go beyond the hit to see if backing producer Mark Ronson might actually have some real staying power. Now, to some extent, I already knew this was going to be the case going into this. I mean, this is Mark Ronson's fourth record over the course of a decade. He's been around for quite some time now. His debut album, Here Comes the Fuzz, came out back in 2003, where he managed to wrangle collaborations not just from Ghostface Killah, Sean Paul, and the late Nate Dogg, but also from Daniel Merriweather and Rivers Cuomo of Weezer. It also had a more of an alternative hip-hop focus, which he abandoned for his 2007 album Version for a slicker, funkier sound. Like his previous album, the reviews were kinda mixed on it, mostly noting the guest overloaded covers often lacked restraint, didn't show off the best of his talent. Now, undaunted, Mark Ronson just kept on trucking, accruing acclaim as a producer behind the scenes thanks to working with Lily Allen, Amy Winehouse, and Adele, and making a slightly more diverse and better album with Record Collection in 2010. Now, sure, it's still swollen with named guest stars, but to be fair, he's a producer working on his own, putting out albums. You kind of expect the guest stars at this point. As such, I wasn't quite sure what to expect with the newest album from Mark Ronson. I mean, Uptown Funk, it's a great song, but how much of it is because of Bruno Mars and how much of it is because of Mark Ronson here? And some of the other guest stars did raise my eyebrows. I mean, Stevie Wonder, sure, but Jeff Bhasker, Keon Starr, Mystikal, the semi-deranged rapper from the early 2000s that sounded a little bit like Old Dirty Bastard and got the prison term that R. Kelly probably should have gotten? Well, at least it was going to be an interesting listen, that's for sure, so I made sure to really delve into Uptown Special. How'd it turn out? Well, it's pretty good. Probably the tightest, most controlled, most thematically cohesive record that Mark Ronson's ever released. And it certainly's got a lot of style that's working its ass off to blend flavors of the past with the newer trends in pop music. As such, it falls into a weird middle ground for me. Modern enough not to be deemed a throwback, but so retro in sound, approach, and even themes that it feels distinctly from a different time. And while I am very much a mark for this style and sound and era of Uptown Special, it also makes me all the more aware of the places where it can't help but feel just a little bit sanitized, a little bit too safe to really cut into the wildfire of late 70s, early 80s Las Vegas. In other words, it's a good album, but not quite a great one. Now, I should explain, and the best place to start would be in the instrumentation and the production. The brand of funk that Mark Ronson introduces does have many of the typical flourishes of the genre. Groove heavy melodies, a real rollicking bass, flicking guitars with blocky, fuzzy tones, plenty of real horns and punchy drums. This is the sort of material that sounds imported straight from the late 70s with plenty of texture, definitely liked it. But the musical textures outside of that Mark Ronson often chooses to utilize are a bit of an odd fit, and very noticeable from the very first song. Deep, but not quite spacious or colorless because of the reverb, but distinctly damp and echoing, the sort of music that almost simmers with roiling chunks of fuzzy synth. It recalls a much stronger modern R&B flavor over funk, and while I won't deny it's got a lot of texture to it, it's got nowhere near the same level of energy and spark. I will say it does help that many of the beats are as sharp and crisp as they are, and while I do wish some of the synthesizer tones had that same degree of tightness and clarity, I get the sense of balance between liquid and defined that Mark Ronson's trying to create with this album. And there were some instrumental moments here where he comes close to really nailing it. I mean, you got that great mournful harmonica on Uptown's first finale, the piano and guitar interplay on Summer's Breakin', the fantastic horns and skittering bass of Feel Right, the snarl of fuzzy guitar line in Case of Fire that transitions gracefully into the pseudo-disco line, the gurgling bass on Leaving Los Feliz against the guitar, and, of course, the fantastic tension of Uptown Funk that only gets better every time I listen to it. Now, the only track I feel that doesn't really work for me instrumentally is Daffodils, mostly because the bass groove balanced against the reverb saturated keyboards, the hollow beat, and the swells of synths just completely killed the momentum of this album for me. It just felt a little bit too drained and washed out. Now granted, part of this has to do with the guest singer, and really so much of this album relies upon the strengths of its guest stars, it's not even funny. And unsurprising, it's something of a mixed bag. Now sure, the interludes from Stevie Wonder are good, Keon Starr, she does bring some fire, and everybody knows that Bruno Mars can pull up this brand of funk in his sleep, but the real standout for me was Mystikal on Feel Right, mostly because his jittery, spasmodic energy and sense of wild-eyed humor was a shot of adrenaline adrenaline that captured why so many of those funk musicians were so captivating as performers. Placing him and Bruno Mars early on this album gives a ton of early momentum, and yet this record really can't sustain it. Andrew Wyatt and Jeff Bhasker probably fare the best, but it's very clear they're producers and songwriters first before being singers, because they don't really have that level of charisma, and the heavier vocal production really doesn't help. The singer that I liked the least, though, was Kevin Parker of Tame Impala. Maybe it's just this production that demands more a potent and explosive singer, but his dreary indie mumble and croon just did nothing for this album's force or vibe. I found him mature on the 3 tracks he was featured on. But you know what? Instrumental flourishes and guest stars will only take an album so far. What about the lyrics? Well, following very much in the vein of the late 70s, early 80s style, the loose narrative of this record feels like a textbook casino story. Kids entranced by the glam of Las Vegas to get away from their problems, they wander in, they win big, they lose big, they deal with all manner of sleaze and double crosses, and eventually wander away, maybe a fair bit poorer for it, but also a fair bit wiser. And of course, there are chunks of this album that are just drenched in leisure suit swagger, showing just how dangerous those seedy lights can be, but just how attractive they are as well, and how they can make everything seem that much better. And really, the fact this album uses such well-established cliches for its story allows it to work more on polishing its style. And I admit that Mark Ronson's darker textures, they aren't a bad fit for accenting the few lonely lights that ring true on this record. The writing is at its best as on Case of Fire, the montage moments where things are starting to spiral downhill. And overall, the lyricism does have that sort of technicolor imagery that you need to set the stage for songs like this. Yeah, the record can get a little bit corny in the writing at points, almost old-fashioned in its earnestness, but you know what? It kind of works for what it's trying to do. I'm giving that a pass. But you know what? Putting aside issues of keeping momentum, my biggest issue with this album is this. When you look at new spins on old genre conventions like this, it's often done in order to make some sort of point, especially when you have an established story that's almost borderline cliche. So with Mark Ronson making his Casino album, what's the new spin here beyond just stylistic flourishes? Well, the more I listened to Uptown Special, the more it felt curiously empty in terms of its narrative and feel. I mean, it plays like a self-aware nostalgia trip through the glory days of Las Vegas, but considering it's nowhere near as rough-edged enough to present any real potent danger, well, beyond feel right, that is, it doesn't really say anything new about that time or about Las Vegas. I mean, sure, you get the all that glitters ain't gold and the downbeat ending that you would expect, but this isn't new, and I'm not just sure that a modernization of the style is enough to save this album or elevate it into something that's really special. This feels a little bit lightweight to me. Now, can I still enjoy Uptown Special by Mark Ronson? Absolutely, it's a ton of fun, there's some great performances, and it's unlike anything else you will hear this year, and really unlike anything else I've ever reviewed. But for as much sizzle as you get on this album, as much flash, there's not a lot of steak here, and that knocks this record back a little bit for me. As it is, it's a light 7 out of 10, and definitely a recommendation, especially if you need a soundtrack for that next Vegas vacation you've been looking to take over reading week. I wish the album had a little bit more punch and emotional heft for me, but it's hard to criticize a record that's this much fun, so definitely check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation or any other albums you want to add to my ever-growing schedule, I'm more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.